Stand up.
Oh yeah, we are off, and hopefully your day is off to a good start. Thank you very much for joining me for part of it. I've got a great interview with not one, but two Pulitzer Prize winning authors, investigative reporters at the New York Times about their amazing new book. And I'm one of the first shows, if not the first show, I think, to actually interview and hopefully get this interview posted. It's called Lucky Loser: How Donald Trump Squandered His Father's Fortune and Created the Illusion of Success. Now, I think I despise Donald Trump as much as, if not more than most people, because I cover him and know so much about him and have for such a long time. But a lot of us feel the same way about the guy, so you would think, well, I don't want to read that book. Oh, this book was real good, real interesting for so many reasons. Just learning about his crazy family, learning about their insanely illegal, fraudulent schemes and dishonesty over the years from his dad, obviously, to him, and how they did it and how he's gotten away with it. It's such great reporting. Russ Buettner, Susanne Craig join me today for the first time, and I'm real excited to have them. That interview begins at 12 minutes if you want to skip the headlines and clips, but I'm here for you with those almost every day of the week. Get your news rundown and recap from Stand Up with Pete Dominick, where most days by midnight or 6 a.m. at the latest, I'll rattle off news stories that impact the most people the most. That is my editorial standard here. That's why I generally choose the stories that I choose. And I can't do any of it without your support. Patreon.com/Pete Dominick is the place to go. This is commercial free, and I'm very happy to try to keep it that way for as long as possible. I did get a message from Brent on yesterday's show when I talked about the show being commercial free and why it matters. And he said, I think you should do ads, but only the non-subscriber podcasts, those who contribute to Patreon, should get an ad-free show, but those that listen to your show on Apple or other podcast players should pay or have to listen to ads. I want you to make as much money as possible without giving up your principles. If somebody's listening to the show for free, why would they pay for a subscription? Great question, Brent, but here is the way I see it. If I had enough listeners to get thousands of dollars a show or an ad, I would put them in, and I did at one point at the beginning of the show because the numbers required weren't nearly as high as they are now that there's a billion podcasts. But I don't, and frankly, nobody does. So you are definitely listening to a lot of podcasts, very good ones, well-produced ones, that have ads littered throughout them where the host or the media company is making maybe $10, $20, maybe $100. I just can't bear putting ads on the show to make a couple $100 a month. And then, by the way, I have to edit another version for subscribers. It would just add to my work, and it wouldn't be worth it at this point. If I'm able to get enough listeners to prove to advertisers that they're going to make money off the show, well, I'll take a look at that if we cross that bridge. But right now, we're not there. And frankly, almost nobody is. I'm telling you, a lot of shows have ads that aren't even paying them, and I see no sense in that. So that's where we're at. It could change, but I need your support with your paid subscription. So hopefully that explains it. Brent and everybody else that has a similar question. All right, let's get to your headlines and clips from yesterday. Let's start overseas, as I like to here at the beginning. And we are in Central Europe, where 17 people have died and several others are missing after days of flooding. Thousands have been displaced, and with heavy rains continuing in some places, officials fear there could be more destruction ahead. The floodwaters have ravaged towns, destroyed bridges, and breached dams since intense rainfall from a storm called Boris. Slow-moving low-pressure system began last week. And speaking of terrible weather and climate issues, a once-in-1,000-year rainfall event, which I feel like we see every year from an unnamed storm, didn't even get a name, has flooded homes and forced rescues in North Carolina. Floodwater surged into homes, stranded vehicles, and forced water rescues in coastal North Carolina on Monday after a tropical storm-like system dumped historic amounts of rain in a matter of hours. And staying here on the coastline, beaches along 50 miles of coast in Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia were closed after needles and other medical waste washed up in popular vacation spots. That sucks. That's always a terrible thing to have to tell your kids why you can't go to the beach this weekend. Oh, yeah, there's just needles everywhere. Not something you see at lakes. I mean, it probably happens. All right, let's head to Florida now, where the big story, of course, is that the suspected gunman in an apparent assassination attempt on former President Trump at his Florida golf club on Sunday has been identified, and he shot no bullets. I repeat, he did not fire a bullet, apparently. The big picture is this guy whose name I won't say, but he's got 3 names. You know him. He was charged with Monday with possession of a firearm by a convicted felon and possession of a firearm with an obliterated serial number. You can't scratch off the serial number. The prosecutor alleged in a complaint that he remained in the vicinity of the area along the tree line near Trump's West Palm Beach club for about almost 12 hours, and they can figure that out because of his cell phone. They can track that. But his criminal history is what's kind of troubling and important, because how did he get a gun? It includes convictions for felonies in North Carolina in December 2002 and March 2010, which prohibited him from possessing a firearm. His 2002 charge was for possessing a weapon of mass destruction, which was a fully automatic machine gun, according to Wired, which interviewed the charging officer in the North Carolina case. He was also the subject of a 2019 FBI investigation based on a tip that he was allegedly in possession of a firearm as a felon. The FBI interviewed the alleged complainant, who did not verify given the initial information, and the case was closed. NBC uncovered 100 criminal counts filed against him in North Carolina. 100 criminal counts, mostly in Guilford County, though it noted the outcome of each case was not clear. The New York Times, for its part, described the shooter, the attempted assassin, the failure, I guess, because he didn't shoot and he didn't assassinate anybody. What should we call him? In the article, as a former construction worker from Greensboro, North Carolina, though the newspapers note he was most recently based in Hawaii. 2 other news outlets, Semaphore and the New York Times, reported that they interviewed him last year. They actually interviewed this guy about his efforts to help Ukraine and offer help as a volunteer soldier, which is weird because apparently he was also a supporter of Tulsi Gabbard, who does not support Ukrainians in that war. He described, though, however, the war in Ukraine is definitely black and white and good versus evil. So why was he supporting Tulsi Gabbard? He was all over the map politically. Apparently, he posted before his account was suspended that he was a Trump supporter in 2016, but he turned against the disgraced former president by 2020. He later expressed support for a ticket involving Republican presidential primary candidates Vivek Ramaswamy and Nikki Haley, but he also reports indicate that he voted in the North Carolina Democratic primary in March. He also made lots of donations dating to 2019, totaling more than $100 through Act Blue, which handles Democratic contributions. And like I said in several posts, he supported former Rep. Tulsi Gabbard. He also appears to have written a self-published book in 2023 titled Ukraine's Unwinnable War, where he described Trump as a fool and a buffoon and criticized the former president for leaving the Iran nuclear deal. And in a section about Iran, apparently he said, "You are free to assassinate Trump for that error in judgment and dismantling of the deal." And he also appears to blame himself in part for Trump's election, saying he misjudged and made a terrible mistake. So that is the latest that I've got for you on him. President Joe Biden condemned the potential assassination attempt against former President Donald Trump, saying there's no place for political violence in America, and America will resolve our differences peacefully at the ballot box, not at the end of a gun, he said while speaking at a conference in Philadelphia to honor historically black colleges and universities. Now let's move on to the chaos in Ohio, which continues as a result of Trump and the senator from Ohio, his VP candidate, J.D. Vance, for perpetuating a myth about some of the best people in town. We now have proof that this viral photo of a guy who's not even a migrant carrying these 2 geese was actually removing them from the street after they got hit by a car. He's like the best neighbor you would want. He does the thing you might not do. He's a good citizen, and they defamed him and slandered him and made a picture go viral that he was eating the geese because that's what they wanted to do, and because people are ignorant and terrible and evil, when in fact, of course, you've actually taken someone who is doing very good things and being a good citizen and made them an enemy and an aggressor and an undocumented person. It's just absolutely horrific. And it continues into today, where 2 Springfield City School District elementary schools were evacuated due to unspecified threats and information received from local police. Absolutely terrible. Well, here's some good news, I guess. If you've got money invested in the stock market or mutual funds, your investment portfolio is doing better than ever. If you're rich, you're getting richer. And if you have any money in the markets, you're doing better. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closed at another all-time high after recouping its losses from early September. The S&P 500 rose to close its own record, was held back by losses in big tech companies like Apple and Nvidia. But rich people should be real happy is any of us with investment portfolios or 401ks. So don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And at least 2 women in Georgia died after they couldn't access legal abortions and timely medical care in their state, according to ProPublica. And they tell that heartbreaking story in their latest. And I mean, these stories are happening probably regularly in the United States, and many of them won't be reported. But any of them that happen and get reported, those stories should be told everywhere. Everybody needs to know what has happened in America due to the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And those are your headlines from yesterday. Unfortunately, I did not get time to pull sound. I thought I would, but I had a great opportunity yesterday that took up much of my afternoon, spending it with my 19-year-old daughter, Ava, who is a film student at the Fashion Institute of Technology. I got us a gig for Climate Week next week, which has me doing all kinds of stuff for this great organization called Save the Humans, this environmental organization that's doing its best to communicate about the climate crisis. So they hired me to do a man on the street shoot, and I hired my daughter to shoot and help edit it. So I spent the afternoon with her yesterday, and it was amazing because it was our first paid gig together, and I'm really hoping that I get to work with her more on different things. We had a lot of fun, a lot of laughs, but it took a lot of time, so I did not get to pull sound for today's show. I apologize about that. Usually I've got a whole bunch of clips in this section, but I do have this great conversation with Russ Buettner and Susanne Craig. They, of course, are both Pulitzer Prize winning investigative reporters at the New York Times. Since 2016, their reporting has focused on the personal finances of the disgraced former president Donald J. Trump, including in-depth articles that revealed the fortune Trump inherited from his father and the record of business failures hidden in 20 years of Trump's tax returns. Those articles were awarded all kinds of prizes, including the Pulitzer. Their new book is Lucky Loser, How Donald Trump Squandered His Father's Fortune and Created the Illusion of Success. It is so good and fascinating and important. As I told you, both of them are on Twitter, and I would love if you went over and let them know that you heard them here on the show. Inheritance, Fraud, Deceit, Debunking the Myth of Donald Trump. There's a couple little echoes that you're going to hear in here because they were both in the same studio. I did about an hour of work just cleaning that up, but I think it's more than tolerable and very brief. So I hope you love my conversation with Russ Buettner and Susanne Craig, and I hope you'll go get the book. Let's do it right now. Okay, Russ and Susanne joined me now. Thank you both so much for joining me, and congratulations on Lucky Loser. What a very, very impressive, deep investigative work. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Well, I guess I'll start with you, Susanne. Both of you have been on this beat since 2016, really, investigating Donald Trump's finances, and you've covered a lot of it in the pages of the New York Times, but boy, do you take a lot more of a deep dive in this book. Tell us the difference between what we've read in the newspaper and what we're getting in this phenomenal new book.
Sure. You know, we started out, Russ and I, just a standard reporting assignment in 2015-16, which was to vet Donald Trump, this candidate running for president. He was sort of late in the race, and he was running around town for years saying he was a billionaire. And the paper's sort of like, well, is he? And what does he own? And what doesn't he own? And what's he been up to? So we started on this journey that started with us just starting to dig into his finances. And then in late 2016, right before the election, I got 3 pages of his 1995 tax returns. And that showed just in that year, he had accumulated loss of almost $1 billion. And that story, we were able to verify that those pages were real and get it to press. And that just started this journey that we had where we kept finding more information about it. We had a story in 2018 that looked at his father's wealth, how much Donald Trump inherited from it, and the tax fraud that went into to that inheritance. And then we got more information in 2020. So we decided we wanted to write a book on this, and we felt we had the skeleton of a story, but we really wanted to tell the definitive biography of Donald Trump and his father going back. We went back 100 years. And this book is a narrative. It's a wild ride through Fred Trump's life, through Donald Trump's life. And we just talked to hundreds of people who had met both of them over the years and looked at, it's called Lucky Loser. It's the luck that he was born into, this incredible wealth that he ultimately inherited a lot of. And we look at a lot about The Apprentice and the fortune he inherited there. And then we go through all the businesses that all that money he invested, a lot of it that lost money. But it's really a narrative. We felt we started out with a skeleton and we really tried to fill it in with stories that, we think are kind of most of them kind of crazy. So that's where we're at. Yeah.
It's hard to think about him and read about him these days, having to cover him for as long as many of us have and being so turned off by so much of what he does. But this book is so enlightening with so many things I can't believe we didn't know. Russ, expand a little bit on what your colleague and co-author just said about how you did this book in terms of the hundreds of interviews and different research that you both have been doing your whole careers as investigative reporters. But what about this one?
This one was particularly unique because we have a candidate for president in 2016 who's almost 70 years old, who's running on the basis that he's great in business, but that proposition's never really been examined. And it's all held in the confines of a very small, privately held company. So we just started trying to peel away layers to that. And we made a lot of progress, but it feels like everything you learned about him, there's more to learn. There's more to flesh out. And I think once we got through these big articles that we did about his tax returns, his business performance, we really had a hunger to tell this all together. And doing that, like little trends emerge that really lead you to the kind of president he's going to be. Like in 1974, we see him he's just started to work for his father. He hasn't built anything, but he's in the papers every other week saying, I'm going to build this massive office tower in Lower Manhattan. I'm going to build a shopping mall in Lower Brooklyn. The papers are calling him a major Brooklyn developer, and he's never built anything. So that's where you start when he's a very young man. And then those kind of things just escalate. And over time, we start to see this is like an amazing American tale from his parents are immigrant and the son of an immigrants, and they make their money taking advantage of government programs that were meant to solve like the biggest crises of the 20th century. He gets hugely rich, and then Donald Trump is the heir to that. So we have a succession process. We have the media playing a role. We have fame and celebrity playing a role. And altogether, it just feels like this very compelling tale that tells us as much about America as it does about him, I think.
Yeah. Well, I feel like so much to be learned, so much I learned reading the book about Dad, Fred Trump. You mentioned just some of the programs that he took advantage of that were not meant for builders like him. Susanne, let's talk just for a good bit about Fred Trump and how he got wealthy. And a lot of it has to do with clearly the same thing lots of developers in New York and around the country did. A lot of illegal things, a lot of work with shady characters, politicians, and even folks in the federal government, like at the FHA. Fred Trump seemed to be a master at developing those relationships, manipulating them, blackmailing them even, but also finding loopholes that he somehow could qualify and, of course, not pay the taxes, as so often wealthy people don't have to do because they find ways around it. Talk to us about how Fred Trump built his wealth using those types of connections and programs.
I love it. You just described that perfectly. I should just move on to the next question. But
well, just pick one because there's so many, like the FHA guy and they get, wasted. And I mean, just so many crazy things.
Right. And he started out as building, single family homes, and then the Depression happened and it created this movement where there was public housing and money for public housing after the war. And he really took advantage of it. And it's incredible the loopholes that he found and he was able to advantage for his family that ended up as part of Donald Trump's inheritance. It was really shocking as we started to go through just to understand sort of the depth of it. And even I remember when we were working, we went down to the Library of Congress where there were some documents we wanted to see. And, we think about how much Donald Trump hates paying taxes. Well, Fred Trump was exactly the same. And we uncovered these documents where he was fighting about how much taxes should be paid. And in doing so, we actually found that he had done some of the writing in all caps, just like Donald Trump does his social media posts. I sent it to Russ and I was like, you're going to die when you see this. And we have this in the book. Like these two, in some ways, could not be so different from each other, but there are so many shades of Fred Trump in the Sun. And, Fred Trump hated debt. He never took on personal guarantees. All the things Donald Trump, took on debt, made personal guarantees. But there was inside, Fred Trump, a lot of what we see in Donald today. That was just one example that we still laugh about.
Tell me more, Russ, about his childhood and his relationship. There are 5 Trump kids, two girls, 3 boys, and you talk about the difference in the way that the parents treated them in terms of what they expected of them. They kind of expected their daughters to actually be more traditional homemakers and their sons to take over in business. And of course, a little bit, if you've been paying attention about what happened in Fred Trump's life, but man, it was tough to read certain things like Fred Trump's dream. The oldest was to be an airline pilot, and he becomes a commercial airline pilot. And apparently they tease him. His own father said, "You're basically a glorified bus driver," I learned in your book. Tell me more about the relationship between Fred and what's the wife's name? I'm blanking.
Marianne.
And their
Fred
kids.
Mary.
Tell me about the relationship between that they had with the kids and the kids' lives growing up more. Russ.
Well, Fred's entire life was always his work. And as much as the kids were around him, they were around him while he was working. But you really nailed it and described what we experienced in reporting this, is that their 2 daughters were never taken seriously for anything other than their potential to marry someone else. Donald's sister, Marianne Trump, after she had a child, put herself through law school, became a federal prosecutor, ultimately became a federal judge. And Fred Trump never really understood why she did that. He didn't respect it at all. And the question he asked her when she was on her way to be sworn in as a judge is, will you get a pension for this? Because to him, that's the only value he could possibly see in it. The younger sister, Elizabeth, never really had much of a career. And so immediately it's the succession battle. Fred wants these properties, this empire that he built that would become worth $1 billion to stay in the family for generations. And so he sets in motion a succession battle between the 3 sons. Robert's just a little too young, never really is a part of that. Freddie, the older son that you described, has other interests, but his father sees no value in anything other than the family business. And by the time Freddie sort of gets so depressed trying to impress his father that he's sinking into alcoholism and having other problems, Donald just comes of age right at that particular moment and is the anointed successor. His father never challenges a thing that Donald ever did again, as far as we know. Completely opposite way of doing business, but Fred fully embraced and supported him and bragged to other people about how he was doing.
Man, I don't know if I want to jump out of childhood into military school yet. It's such a hard interview to do, because every chapter the reader learns so much about his life. And I could ask in reading it and stay on his childhood for half an hour. But let's go. I feel like one of the most telling tales in this book is when, for a photo in his graduating class at the military academy, Trump asks to borrow the jacket of the kid who was the most awarded, who had all the medals. And so he wore his jacket. He wore somebody else's jacket, somebody else's awards for a photo, which is just, I feel, an important anecdote, because it tells the tale of the man and who he has always been. We can get to all the other things he's done, and we will, The Apprentice and putting his name on buildings and not doing anything. But it's like taking the credit. Stolen valor could be another name for this book. So, Susanne, what about that story, and what about anything else we could talk a little bit about? Why did he go to the military academy before he does that very deceitful thing?
We should talk about the jacket episode, but let's talk about how he ended up at the military academy, because it is interesting, and I think it leads to that moment, stolen valor at the military academy. And he was a brat growing up. I don't know if there's any other way to put it. He was a handful for his parents. There's this episode in the book that sort of, I always laugh about it, and it's you know kids, like everybody's known kids like this. Fred Trump had a membership at a country club, and they would go there every weekend or two. And Donald Trump would stand at the pool. He would get up on the diving board, and when guests would come in, he would jump off the high board and splash them. And then he would deny that he'd done it. Like, he was just a troublemaker. And there's a lot of episodes that lead up to Donald, that we see Donald.
Just that's the first time I've imagined Donald Trump with wet hair.
I know. We didn't want that.
There are so many episodes like that. Sorry, Susanne, you were saying.
Yeah, there's so many episodes like that, and Fred Trump was getting frustrated at his son. He had his eldest son who was interested in music and other things, and may or not at this point be an heir, but he really wanted to straighten Donald Trump out. So I remember he got sent there one September. All the kids at his high school showed up in September. Trump wasn't there, and he was just gone. And so then he enters the New York Military Academy. And this is more of a kind of a boarding school situation. It's not like a real proper military school. They were given rifles that weren't loaded and all this. They had to march. They did a lot of marching. They had to clean the barracks, make sure their beds were really well made. They would get medals for things like that. But getting to the scene about the jacket that he wore somebody else's jacket for the class photo. I remember when that happened, it really struck me as being such an important incident because it was the first one we really saw as a teenager where he's doing the sort of thing that we see today. And what happened was they were getting ready for the class photo, and it was the graduating photo, and it was in the fall of the year he graduated. And he goes into his buddy's barracks, his room, and they're chatting. And the cadet that he was friends with, his name is Michael Scadron, and Michael had more medals on his jacket than Donald Trump did. So Donald says to Michael, "Can I borrow your jacket for the class photo?" And Michael did not care. He said, "Sure." So they went for the class photos, and Donald wore Michael's jacket. And Michael's an interesting character because he gets into trouble, and he ends up not even appearing in the class yearbook because he's expelled from the school that year because he got in a fight with a younger cadet who made a racial slur against him. And Michael Scadron's own accounting to me, he says that he beat the kid almost, just kept beating him. He had a broomstick with a metal chain attached to it. I think Michael used to sort of walk around and make a show of it on campus that he had it. And he picked it up that day and he beat that cadet almost within an inch of his life and was expelled from the school. So the only appearance Michael Scadron's jacket makes in the yearbook is on Donald Trump.
Yeah, well, that kid did call his dad a pretty bad name.
He did.
I don't want to repeat.
So there was another moment there, Russ, having to do with the swords and orders given and Trump just not obeying them, which is another. I mean, I think throughout your book, especially in his youth, but even in his time in The Apprentice, there's just constant hallmarks, trademarks of the behavior that we've all seen him display on the national stage as a candidate, as president, and so on. What happened there, or anything else you want to talk about his military academy time? Yeah,
that's a great observation, Pete. So there comes a day that for the yearbook photo, the top cadet, these things are structured in a hierarchical way, like a military-like structure, and the top cadet unites his captains, of which Donald Trump is a part of that. It's like the 6 sort of senior people of the senior class. And they're going to take a photo where they're going to march across the yard, and they're going to draw their swords in a particular sort of parade-like theatrical way. And the top cadet, this guy, George Polk, later changed his name, issues the order, draw saber. And all the other cadets in the leadership squad pull their swords like they're supposed to, lean them on their shoulder like they're supposed to, and Trump does not. And so somebody from behind Trump shouts, "Trump, draw your sword," people who are watching. Again, he does not do it. And they keep marching with the photographer in front of them. And finally, the photographer just takes the photo. And all these years later, when you look at that photo, there's 5 fellows, I think, in it. All 4 of them have their sword drawn except Donald Trump, who does not. And the chief cadet, George Whittick, later heard that Trump was showing that photo around saying, see, I don't pay attention to authority. And like you're describing, it's a weird thing where he's sort of insolent towards anyone in a position of authority, but wants that authority for himself.
Well, it's also, I think, we've heard a lot of anecdotes about his childhood and about his life and about his psychology, and we can all speculate on psychology and how you grew up and how your parents treated you and so on. But that mentality, I think, applies to the rest of a lot of what the book is, when you go kind of back and forth between his behaviors and his financial engagements and records. And the way I see it, the way I would deduce it, psychology, is that he doesn't have to play by the rules. And that means the rest of us who pay our taxes, the rest of us who borrow money, we have to pay it back. We have to pay our taxes. We have to follow the rules and the laws about buying just about anything. That's never been what he believes. And we've seen that, and we see it play out throughout your book, whether it's building, development, or as we see in The Apprentice. I mean, constantly it would seem that he simply does not think that he has to play by the same set of rules that the rest of American taxpayers, developers, investors, politicians, whatever, have to play. Susanne, am I anywhere close to, who knows the psychology, but isn't that what has happened with his financial dealings? No one knows better than you two.
Yeah, no, it becomes a pattern throughout his life that just the rules don't apply to him, and he moves through life. We see it chapter in and chapter out in the book that, he thinks he can do what he wants. He usually does. Some things, we see he'll start projects and lose crazy amounts of money, but he'll have partnerships where they blow up because of, self-inflicted wounds. I mean, this goes on and on, chapter after chapter in the book.
Is there any way, Russ, for both of you, to figure out if he has lost more money than he's made over his lifetime? Is there any way to answer that question? It would seem it's almost, because you can't know. I mean, you, as you both say, you're not quite sure how much he got in this deal or that deal. Not everything is publicly available, and as good as you both are at getting information, some of the stuff you just can't get, so you have to estimate. So is there any way of knowing?
I don't think there's a way, because you can't really track what happens to $1 as it moves through, right? Here's what we can tell. From these three sort of lucky pillars of his life, his inheritance, the fortune he made from being on The Apprentice, and a smaller fortune he made from being pushed into an investment in two buildings that were well run, not by him, he got about $1.5 billion, at least in today's money, from those things. That will paper over a tremendous amount of failure, right? You can be mediocre or lose money, but you could really add to your point. You could add to that not paying back money that he borrowed. You could add to that money that he should have paid in taxes that he didn't, that he might still have to, and you get up to astronomical numbers. One thing you can tell, and we have this line in the book, is if he had invested that money in the stock market as it came his way, he would be infinitely more wealthy today than he actually is.
Right. Which just defies the whole narrative that he's a genius. Had he just put that money into the S&P 500 or whatever it is, he would be way more wealthy. How do we measure? We can measure to some extent how much money his daddy gave him. In today's dollars, I think probably it's easier to understand, which you do for us, Susanne. But how much did he give him, and how often did he bail him out, and how come he never scolded him for losing the last amount of money he gave him?
How much did he make? What do we have, Russ? It was $400 million when we did the story, probably $500 million now in today's dollars. That he inherited, and some of that was enhanced through tax shenanigans. Why did he never scold him? I mean, I think when we think about it, it's always hard to get inside these relationships, but Russ and I have sure tried. I think he needed an heir, and when he landed on Donald, that was it. There was no other real options for him. And he just decided that Donald was his man, and he was going to back him. And we see it's really interesting in that time. There were a lot of real estate kind of moguls in New York that had sons that were coming up in the business. We talked to somebody who was a really interesting conversation that this fellow's memory was, and he knew these guys, he knew the sons. He remembers how hard these tough real estate guys were on their sons, and it was really hard on the sons. Then he remembers Fred, and he would run into Fred, and Fred would always just be like, how about my Donnie? Like, he was just so supportive of him, and it was shocking just given what we know about Fred. there was a lot of issues with Fred, but Fred was very good at what he did. He stuck to his knitting. He made a ton of money. He didn't take on debt. He had a lot of cash. I mentioned no personal guarantees. Donald broke all of those rules. He became a black hole for Fred's money, and he still continued to back him. And it really, I think, has affected Donald Trump and who he is today. You imagine you have a life where pretty much every risk that you've taken, it's covered by somebody. That's got to have a huge effect on who you are.
And so much of what he did as a, quote, businessman was just performance, almost performance art, a big lie, and always about who he was. I just feel like when we talk about other developers in building, in real estate, in New York or anywhere else, it isn't about the name as much as the product. You build a quality product, you get more contracts, you get a reputation, yeah. But most people didn't put their names on buildings. You don't know who built the building with a name on it necessarily. And certainly Fred Trump didn't seem to think that was an important idea. He was a more traditional builder, even though he cut all those corners and did a lot of illegal things and was a pretty terrible guy and to people in general. But Donald Trump puts his name on everything. He wears somebody else's medals. He calls and pretends to be somebody else as his own publicist. He lies about everything he ever did, and it works for him. And I think probably no better place overall than The Apprentice, which I should have told you before we hit record. I was on it. I was on the show as a comedian, and there's nothing I could have revealed to you before the book that would have been interesting, and I've already talked about it with listeners. But one thing that you talk about, I'm fast forwarding, but all the endorsement deals that they ended up getting on the show, where they'd put product placement inside the show to make more money, and we can talk about that. But let's just talk about how that developed, because he was able to pass off and convince Americans, arguably that's how he became worldwide famous, even more, that he was a successful businessman. And you guys are also very good at pointing out how so many media outlets, including, quote, respectable ones, went along with selling that lie. So, Russ, where do you want to start in The Apprentice and Mark Burnett's decision to choose him as the billionaire who they're going to make this show about? Because there were others too, right? They considered, but they were actually too busy working.
Too busy working and probably boring and stuck to the facts. I mean, look, Mark Burnett shows up one day in Donald Trump's office with this perfect idea. He had a tremendous success with Survivor, a success with Echo Challenge. He had virtually invented this new idea of a reality-based game show, at least in the United States. And he wanted to be closer to his kids. So he wanted to create a show, as he called it, Survivor in the City. And to do that, his idea was it would be a season-long challenge for a job with a famous business tycoon. But he needed that person, needed somebody who you would look at and say, oh my God, of course people from Harvard and Yale would fillet themselves in order to try to get a job with this guy. And when they walked in, Donald readily went along with that. Trump said, sure, I'll do it. And they cut a deal. Mark Burnett promised to give him half of whatever he made from product integration, which was a new concept at the time. No one knew what it was going to be worth. And then one day the producers showed up and to survey what they thought was going to be their new set. And they walk into the 26th floor and they're expecting to see this hub of international business. And right away they notice that the place stinks. The carpet smells like this moldy carpet everywhere they go. All the furniture is chipped. All the furniture dates back 20 years to when Trump had opened the building. Trump's own desk has nothing on it, no sign of work, except for newspaper clippings and magazine clippings about himself. And so they knew they were going to have to invent this whole thing. And one of the first things they did when they started production was to spend their time creating what would become a 3-minute video, just a commercial to Donald Trump's awesomeness. They filmed him on top of Trump Tower. They filmed the Taj Mahal, which was about to go bankrupt, as if it was like one of the most amazing casinos in all of the world. They filmed an estate he had bought north of the city for a very small amount of money because he wanted to turn into a golf course, but he had failed to build it into a golf course, but it was now an emblem of his awesomeness again. And that commercial repeated week after week just changed the way Americans saw him. His Gallup had done surveys about his name recognition before that. Before that, almost everybody knew who he was, but very few people had a positive approval rating view of him. After 18 months of that show and that sort of thing airing week after week, more than half of all Americans viewed him favorably. That's a seismic shift. It's the highest rating the Gallup surveys ever found for Donald Trump. But that is really what set it on motion, brought in licensing deals that made him rich. And as you said, set him on the path to the White House. Yeah, because before The Apprentice, he was in bad shape, right, Susanne, financially?
Right. No, that's right. And we should also tell you, just so you know about that, we did an excerpt for the on the some of the Apprentice stuff. There's a lot more in the book, but we did an excerpt for the New York Times on the weekend. And a lawyer for Donald Trump has sent us a cease and desist notice about that, that they may sue us on that. We just wanted to let you know that that's in the works in terms of just, so that's out there.
Don't you get that every time you post a report in the New York Times, much less in this book? And also you asked for comment on everything and they gave you nothing, right?
Both for the book and for the excerpt, and we didn't hear back. And he has sued us once before. It was involving the 2018 story that we did, where we looked at Fred Trump's wealth and the tax fraud that enhanced that. And he sued both Russ and I in the newspaper, another colleague of mine, and Mary Trump, who was a very important source for us on that story. And she's obviously, Donald Trump's niece, and she is still in litigation with him over that. But the New York Times and Russ and I have been removed from that. So this is potentially our second go around with him, but he wasn't happy about The Apprentice excerpt.
Well, I was on The Apprentice, I think it was 2004, and I'll just never forget. I was there because Joe Piscopo was union and I was not union. They wanted Joe Piscopo to host this fundraiser. One of the competitions, it was the season finale. And they had to host a fundraiser. And so they hosted a comedy fundraiser and they needed comedians. So they hired me and 4 others. And they asked us, cameras are always rolling, obviously. And they said, Mr. Trump is going to be here soon. Would you like to meet him? And I was the veteran and the host of the show there. So I looked at the other comedians and nobody said anything. And then I just spoke up and I said, does he want to meet us? And the producer said, not necessarily, but we could probably arrange a meeting if you want. And I looked at them and I said, I'm good. And the reason why I said that then is because I thought he was a disgusting man then. And the reason I tell that story in this interview and to you is because he was able to change his image or introduce himself to the first time to most people. Whereas a New Yorker and maybe somebody in the entertainment business, I had my opinion of him just from the tabloids and his behavior around women. But that's not so much what played out on The Apprentice. What played out on The Apprentice wasn't his disgusting behavior around women as much. You could see it. But it was his, quote, business acumen. What did he do to get more money from NBC, and how did he work around even the guy who picked him, much less the network, to make more money for himself? Because that is some of the good stuff in here. And bad stuff. Terrible, terrible stuff, but also good stuff. Oh, and I also remember during that taping, it was sponsored. They had a sponsor, as you talked about. It was Yahoo. And they didn't make me say, but they were serving a drink called a Yahoo-tini. And in my stand-up act, I made fun of that. They didn't like it. But they also, and I remember, and I might still have, 2 really nice duffel bags with Yahoo on them. There was product placement everywhere. Everybody got a bag. Everybody saw Yahoo, and they were the big sponsor. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, that time, it's incredible when you look back at how much money he made from that. It started out, season 1, Mark Burnett, just to back up a little bit, had made a deal with NBC when he came to them, The Apprentice, and this idea for the show, that they could control the money coming in from commercials. It was significant, but that he wanted the product placement money. He had seen the potential for it in Survivor. I don't think it hadn't been realized to the extent he was ultimately able to with The Apprentice. But he said, if I can get corporations to come on and, the 2 teams can battle, do an ad campaign for a toothpaste, whatever that company is willing to pay, I want it. And he struck a deal with Donald Trump that Donald Trump would get half of all the product placement money. So you see, season 1, they're selling lemonade. They're not, the show's just sort of taking off. But Madison Avenue was watching. In season 2, it went nuts. these corporations started paying $1 million, $2 million. We saw as the show went on into season 4, some people were paying $4 and $5 million to get on the show. Donald Trump was getting half of it. And that was he had to show up for the boardroom scenes, a few other things. And every time he would get half of it. Mark Burnett was taking care of all of the production, all of the work. It was an incredible boon for him. And then you see, as time goes on, that's not enough. And he starts to cut deals where he's actually cutting Mark Burnett out of some of the money. He's going around, and we have this incredible anecdote in the book about to do with the learning addicts. There was a staffer named Dan Gill who worked for Mark Burnett. He pitched the idea of the learning addicts coming on the show, and the money they were talking was roughly $2 million that the learning addicts would pay to come on. So Donald Trump would get $1 million of that. Everything was going great, and then all of a sudden Dan Gill gets a call from somebody at the learning addicts and said it's off because there's separate negotiations going on between the head of the learning addicts, Bill Zanker, and Donald Trump, and they've cut a separate deal. Well, it turns out Donald Trump got several $1 million from the learning addicts to do some speeches, a check that went directly to him. Mark Burnett got none of it. Then the learning addicts paid, I think, about $50,000 for their episode, but they got an episode, but Donald Trump got all of that money.
You know, someone might get the impression, and just based on some of what we're talking about, certainly not from your book, because you have so much more to say, that he was just smart and conniving, or they might not feel bad for a millionaire like Mark Burnett getting screwed out of deals on the show that he created. They might not feel bad for a major bank or casino that went bust after they loaned him money or he never paid him back. But I feel like the most powerful anecdotes are the way that Donald Trump treated individual business owners, like that piano tuner he bought a bunch of pianos from, and then he just never paid him, and the guy went out of business. Or in your book you talk about, it might have been Dan Gill, I forget who it was, the deal with Levi's, where he said, hey, I'll give you 10% of a deal, and he gets him a $50,000 deal. He ends up giving him a golf club that he signed. I mean, to me, that's the most deeply horrible thing that you do. And by the way, most of us do that one time and it catches up with our reputation. That guy won't pay you. He'll make a deal and he won't pay you. That's why most people, whether they're good people or not, you know, I'm in the comedy business. Like, no one ever didn't pay me because they, as terrible as they were, but because they needed comedians next week. And if you said that guy doesn't pay, he doesn't get to have a comedy show anymore. Donald Trump, Russ, was able to get away with this throughout his career. Just not paying people, just screwing people over, just putting people out of business. You mentioned that his casino in Atlantic City, not only did it not make money, it took money from all the other casinos. I don't feel so bad for them, but this is the narrative that we see, whether you're big or small. He's just not going to pay you, and it doesn't matter apparently.
Yeah. His casinos actually took money from each other. He overbuilt too many of them, and he was devouring himself. But you're right. Part of his legacy in Atlantic City is a string of contractors who were never paid for construction. And I felt like sometimes he had an heir's approach to litigation and paying bills, right? He didn't want to pay the full freight that he promised people. We saw this in golf courses that he built, where he would hire a contractor or an architect to do a project. It would get done. And then he would say, I don't like it. I'm going to pay you 30 cents on the dollar. And he would just leave no alternative for that person other than to sue him. Well, most people can't afford to pursue that kind of case. They know that they'll lose more money in litigation they've got coming. Donald Trump's been playing that gambit over and over again. And I think you're right. It's part of his magic act that he's been able to do that for so many decades and still find people willing to work with him. It includes, by the way, lawyers who he did not pay for their representation, but he still has no problem. Well, not a little bit of a problem finding lawyers to handle his legal
isn't it true
cases.
that like his campaign owes money to towns that have provided security throughout his campaigning? I feel like entire towns that they provide police and so on, and then the campaign is supposed to pay him, and most campaigns do, and he just doesn't. We didn't even get to his time as president, really. But I mean, we can talk about that, and you can read about it in the book. I just feel like I've got to ask you both before I leave, why is this book important for the American public, voters, to read, to know about what's in this before the election or anytime? Susanne.
Well, I think he's running for president again. He is the standard bearer of the Republican Party. When I think about it, he's probably the most significant person of our time and one of the most well-known, if not the most well-known person in the world. And I think understanding the facts about him are important to us. I always joke, if you cut me, I think I'm going to bleed ink. I'm a journalist to the core, and I believe that the truth matters. And I still have a belief, despite a lot of the things going on in the country and people's inability, like the unwillingness to believe the truth sometimes when they're presented with it, that people do want facts and they do want the truth. And that's what Russ and I tried to do. We spent years putting this book together, and it's important. It's going to be important in the next 6 weeks. And I think it's going to be important 10 years from now. And I think 50 and 100 years from now, when people are still trying to understand this period in our history.
Yeah, you've done a remarkable job documenting it for all of us. Russ, what would you add to Susanne about why it's important?
I think Sue made all the right points. I think that he is, we're again at this moment and we're still trying to figure out why. People still look at him and try to figure out how it was that he became so prominent based on what they know of him, right? And I think if you look back at the years as we have, his entire life feels like a precursor to who we saw in 2016 and who we saw in the White House and who we're going to see again if he wins. And I think that there's a real important lesson there about who we are as a country, how we assign excellence to people, who we imbue with competence, how we assume someone is capable of doing a job. And we really should look at that, look at ourselves. And his life really is a giant warning sign that that system is a little bit broken.
Very well said. I would imagine you both have tried over and over to interview Donald Trump, but have you ever?
Yeah.
You have. On this?
We each have like once or twice. Yeah.
When this happened in 2016, for me, before he became the Republican nominee, in fact, I used to talk to him a fair bit. I was writing a lot on him. Some of them weren't quite daily stories, but every couple of weeks. And he actually seemed to know the number for the Metro desk at the New York Times, because he would phone and there'd be, Sue Craig, the phone, what number are you at? And I'd get transferred and it would be Donald Trump. And so what a classic New York character that he knew that number for the Metro desk of the Times. But once he became elected, it all changed. And now he normally just sends us legal letters.
Yeah, I worked at the Daily News in the 1990s, and there was a joke within the newsroom that when there was someone quoted as a source close to the Donald, it was the Donald. And no one really wanted to take that call because they knew what you were in for, right? He was going to try to dish on somebody to get attention. But I didn't write about him for many years. And then in 2016, I was working on a story with a colleague of ours, Charles Bagley, about his history in casinos. And it was a really interesting experience for me because I found this example where he had made a misrepresentation that had legal consequences. And I talked to former prosecutors who said, oh, if people would have known about that, that's a white collar crime. He would have been prosecuted, at least indicted for that. And so we sent him a letter, faxed it over there saying our findings are that this was an indictable offense. Well, usually when we send that to anybody, let alone a prominent person, it gets a lot of attention really quick. But when we met on the phone for the scheduled interview, he hadn't seen the letter. He shouted out, Rona, did I get a letter, a fax or something from the Times? And she brought it over to him and he goes, I don't want to read this. It was 300 words. What does it say? And I told him, and he said, yeah, I don't know. Sometimes it's, whatever. I don't remember that. I don't think I did anything wrong. It's okay. Write what you need to write. It really did not affect him, this idea that you were going to say that. And I think that's, again, a defining characteristic is that he's not concerned whether you think he's lying, whether you think he lacks integrity, whether you think he doesn't have follow through. That's fine with him. He's just going to be able to convince other people differently. And he's lived his life on that proposition. Yeah,
somewhat unprecedented in American life, much less American politics, to not be concerned about being caught in a lie. And increasingly, others are thinking the same way. I don't know that they all get away with it. Congratulations. What a book.
Thank you.
What an amazing, interesting, fascinating, I think very important book from two very, very respected investigative reporters. Congratulations to both of you. Thank you both so much for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks so much, Pete.
It's really fun. Thanks, Pete.
Did you hear that? Really fun, said the Pulitzer Prize winner to me. Now, it's great to have their respect. They definitely were very kind and generous with their words on the record there, and then after, had a great conversation with them. And I hope that you'll go let them know that you heard them here on the show. They're both on Twitter. I'm sure they'll see your mentions. So thank you to everybody who does that every day, everybody who supports me with a paid subscription. If you're not, please do. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. I try to make this show free, but it is not cheap. So please consider a subscription if you're still listening. You probably are, hopefully already, a subscriber. You bumblebees here at the end, you're the best. John Carroll writes the music for this show, the theme song, johncarroll.org. Go support him, and I will talk to you right here tomorrow.
See the forest full of burning trees, you got to stand up. Hey, you've been sitting so long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change would begin. They had to stand up. Alright, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up, stand up. Got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand